one of our biggest problems in our area is that our main drinking water supply comes from a really highly sought after, fast developing region called the Texas Hill Country, and it's unfortunate that we need to leave a certain percentage of that hill country in natural state so that the groundwater can recharge itself in a clean way. Otherwise, we're really going to like pollute our own drinking water supply. But that happens to be an area where there's a lot of, the housing markets are booming and a lot of people are moving there. And a lot of people want to be close to those trails and rivers and streams that make it so beautiful. And so there's a high demand for this kind of stuff. And, unfortunately, the laws of Texas are not set up in such a way to prevent lots of little incremental changes from slowly degrading a water supply like this. And that's what we're seeing. We're just seeing piece by piece, development by development, paved ranch by paved ranch being converted from a ranch land into a neighborhood that is just blanketing these watersheds with asphalt, concrete, rooftops, things that don't allow the water to soak into the ground the way that they're supposed to. And they collect a bunch of pollutants from people's roofs and their roads and their lawns and all that stuff, and they flush it right into our drinking water. In San Antonio, we don't have a treatment plant that would treat that water before we drink it. What we do is we put a little bit of chlorine into it to disinfect it from bacteria and stuff like that. And then we put some fluoride in it for dental health. And that kind of treatment is all we have. So, a city that has a big reservoir or something like that, a lot of surface water collecting, they tend to build water treatment plants that filter the water before it comes to you. For us to build something like that for a system that has been based on groundwater would mean charging people who already live here, many of whom are very poor in this city, to build a giant pre-treatment plant to treat it. We're talking just billions and billions of dollars to fix something that we should just prevent in the beginning. That's a lot of what our organization works on.
Mm-hmm. And in addition to those issues across the state now, we're hearing about groundwater depletion. Do you want to kind of address that?
Yeah, this is a story that's hard to do for a lot of journalists because it's so broad and so big. It's a story about a system that doesn't work, and that is not a very sexy news topic, unfortunately, because there are many little anecdotes to peel off of this. There are many little threads that a journalist could follow, but the real story is that the way that Texas regulates groundwater, especially like the pumping of these aquifers, doesn't tend to work in most of the state. An exception would be actually the Edwards Aquifer and the Edwards Aquifer Authority. The way that regulation is set up, and it's a little complicated, but I'd be happy to help any reporter who is interested in learning about that learn more about why the Edwards Aquifer is a little different. But some of these other ones, you just see, even though they have groundwater conservation districts and permitting systems, and they have people going out and checking the water levels in the wells all the time, it's just not doing its job of stopping these aquifers from being slowly mined down. A lot of times these places, they're aware that this is happening. They're stopping it from being drawn down as fast as it could be, but you still are just looking at these cumulative impacts, and it's going in the opposite direction from where we want it to go. An example that I covered for years was the Vista Ridge pipeline in San Antonio, which is the largest water transfer project in Texas history. It's bringing water from a groundwater aquifer in between Houston and Austin, and shipping it more like 150 miles all the way south to San Antonio. Very California-esque way of approaching water. And it's not the only project like that that's pumping from those aquifers in the area. There's a bunch of other ones too. And cumulatively, if everyone pumps everything they're allowed to pump, these aquifers are going to draw down significantly. People's springs will dry up, their wells will dry up. You take away the future of an area when you remove its water like that. And there just doesn't seem to be any way to really stop that from happening at this point. It's just this slow, creeping, approaching trend that we're all seeing. And there are so many examples of aquifers like that all over the state. And so, it's the people who are saying this. There was a report that came out in this November. I was a set of reports actually by the Meadows Center for Water and the Environment at Texas State, as well as Environmental Defense Fund, and they kind of just lay it out point blank. They say that statewide Texas is losing groundwater at nearly twice the maximum sustained rate, and it's going to just only increase in the coming years. And some of the worst of it is not really necessarily in the area where there's tons of population, but in northern Texas, in the high plains and up in the Panhandle. They say that groundwater is being pumped out of the Ogallala Aquifer, which maybe many journalists have heard about because it extends all the way north, like into the Dakotas. Um, but our portion of that aquifer is being drained than its sustainable rate, they say. So what happens, what does that mean for the future of people who live over the Ogallala? It's like these decisions are going to ripple out in time for decades. So Texas has its own electrical grid for the most part. El Paso is an exception to that. It's on the neighboring Western interconnect. So most of the state, except for parts of the Panhandle, I believe, and El Paso, are all on this one system. And it's the smallest standalone electrical grid in the U.S. One cool thing about it is that it's very clean energy friendly. It's really facilitated just the way that we regulate it, where you kind of you pay people for what they produce. Like when I say people, you pay energy producers, companies, investors, small companies, wind farms, solar farms, coal plants, gas plants, whatever. You pay them for the energy they actually make. So, it's kind of agnostic towards which type of power it is or how reliable that power is. It's like if you're feeding into the system, you're getting paid, and if you're not, you're not. So this has allowed, because we're so rich in solar and wind resources, this has really allowed a lot of clean energy development to accelerate in Texas, not because there was any government mandate to put a lot of wind and solar on the system or anything like that, but just because it made money sense for a lot of these companies. So the problem is, like, when we have this cleaning grid, and we have a grid that's like losing those traditional, coal and natural gas power sources, and there's no new nuclear coming in or anything like that. We don't have batteries are coming onto the grid at a really fast rate, but we don't have a ton of batteries out there right now. So it's not a good way to store all this wind and solar. It has to be kind of instantaneously available. So as this is happening, it's becoming so that when there's a giant statewide catastrophe, weather catastrophe like there was with the winter storm in February 2020, a lot of these systems kind of, when they fall apart, there's no cavalry to rush in from the other states and to provide us power when we need that. So it's like, the thing about that February storm last year was that it's this like incredibly rare ice event layered over this energy market that doesn't have good connections to the outside. So the biggest problem really was that the natural gas industry failed to perform in that cold weather. We are very reliant. We know that wind and solar don't produce as much in the wintertime. We are very reliant on natural gas in Texas during the wintertime. That gas system did not do its job in the cold in February 2021. And it was the biggest source of all these these power plant failures. And when it got to this level of there was not enough power on the grid to supply everyone who needed it, they started forcing all these rolling blackouts to go on across the state in order to, stop the grid from collapsing entirely. If it had collapsed entirely, the entire state would have been blanketed in darkness for weeks. So if we do connect the grid to the other states, we can draw power from them during emergencies, but we can also sell power to them from our clean energy sources when we have abundant. There's times where the price of electricity is actually like negative in Texas because there's so much wind power on the grid. We'll only build more wind and solar if we can ship that power to other states who really need it sometimes. Like, we can really be a better energy powerhouse if we're less of an energy island. And the problem is, it sounds great. What's not great about connecting to the other grids is it's like a 10-year process in terms of putting all the wires together, getting all the regulations in line to match up with the other grids, and getting all the people who need to approve that kind of thing. Can you imagine like a 10-year political project to like make the world a better place in 2022? It seems like such a far-fetched thing, but that's really like what needs to happen. And I just kind of have to hold out hope that if enough people are pushing for something like that, then politicians of both parties could take it on. But that's really what it would take. We just need somebody to kind of set aside their own self-interest and push this project through, because 100 years later, Texans will thank them, honestly. Even like we get to like the middle of the century, we're going to need our neighbors to to help us, and we're going to need to help them too.